Recording. All right, we are recording. So we're going to be, I can't even remember. I always think I need to check and see what episode this is. I think we're at 28 or 29 or something like that, whichever. But this is just this, Richard Rohr. If you are watching our archives and you would like to join us live, just take a look at the comments below the streaming window, and there are links that you can join us with. We'd love to have you live if you would like, but you can continue watching the archives as well. We're going to be starting on page 44 with neither clinging nor opposing. And thanks everybody for coming back after a week off. Remembering, yeah, we're here.
Yay.
It's amazing how you just miss one or two, and it's like you've reset the whole apparatus. So glad to have you back. If right before we dive into the text, is there anything over the last 2 weeks that you have been thinking about, processing, or wanted to lead with tonight? Okay. So interesting. I look at Kathy and Randy and Scott, and they all have this flicker of ceiling fans over their head.
The distracting, I can move it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's just kind of cool. I just noticing the three of you have, and it's like they're all going to the same beat. So,
Our alien transmission machines
yeah,
transmitting the signal.
very good. Okay, neither clinging nor opposing. So what we have come from the week before, so it's getting to be 2 weeks ago, we had what you resist persists. And he's going to be continuing this theme with neither clinging nor opposing. But just a basic principle of the way that our minds work is that if we resist something, we're actively giving it more energy. Even if it's negative energy and we're resisting it, we're still giving it more energy. And so it's literally the two wolves inside that are fighting, the good wolf and the bad wolf. And the one that wins is the one that we feed. So if we're giving it energy, if we're giving it attention, it is gaining on us, even if we're trying to resist it. So resistance doesn't work when we're talking about the way our mind operates. And so if we really want to find that contemplative space, we're not trying to resist the distracting thoughts. We're ignoring them. We're cutting off their blood supply, cutting off their oxygen supply by coming back and focusing on really nothing, but at least just being present to the moment. So he's going to take that the next step now and saying that it's neither clinging nor opposing. It's interesting, just last Sunday, we were talking about our aversions and our preferences that are the manifestations of our underlying unconscious programs. So we're really talking about the same thing. What are we clinging to? What are we trying to avoid? What are we trying to oppose? And both of those are going to be taking us out of the contemplative space. So we're going to want to be avoiding those. So let's just read through this section, then we'll come back and start picking it apart. So page 44, neither clinging nor opposing. If I had told my novice master in 1961 that I wasn't going to fight my distractions, he would have said, so you're going to entertain lustful or hateful thoughts. But that would have largely missed the point. The real learning curve happens when you can admit that you're having a thought or feeling and see that it's empty, passing, and part of your own fantasy world that has no final reality except as a lesson. Listen honestly to yourself. Listen to whatever thought or feeling arises. Listen long enough to ask, why am I thinking this? What is this saying about me that I need to entertain this negative, accusatory, or lustful thought? You don't have to hate yourself or condemn yourself for a thought or feeling, but you do have to let it yield its wisdom. Then you will see that it is the wounded or needy part of you that wants these unhealthy thoughts. The whole you, your true self, does not need them and will not identify with them. If you can allow your thoughts and feelings to pass through you, neither clinging to them nor opposing them, and without ever expecting perfect success, I promise that you will come to a deeper, wider, and wiser place. Believe it or not, even your inability to fully succeed is in itself another wonderful lesson. Okay.
It sounds like what I was just going through.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
if you could go through what you're going through with neither clinging to it or opposing it, I guess we'd be moving into contemplative space. Of course, when you're being assaulted, it's a little different situation, right? You're
Yeah.
gonna have to make some choices there. But when it comes to the interior space, yeah, it's a little different. Any
Right.
initial reactions to it? Any thoughts? Anything stand out? Jump out?
It all stood out and jumped out. This particular paragraph, chapter, verse, whatever you want to call this, it says a lot. It's got a lot to say. It's got some really good stuff, more than
It's
anything else so far that we've read as far as how it's landing on me.
initially it seems like it's hard to do because you're not clinging and you're not opposing. You're really working hard to just let it pass through you.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that's pretty tough to do.
Suggested questions that he has, you're asking yourself these various questions, is really enlightening too, because it kind of shines the light on these distracting thoughts. And the minute you shine the light on them, you eviscerate them, they evaporate. So
Did this seem counterintuitive to anybody? That this is exactly the opposite of what you may have thought you should be doing? In that first line, he's positing that it would have been completely counterintuitive to his novice master in 1961, right?
Yeah. It's
I
kind
mean,
of
I don't know
bold.
about you,
bold,
but
isn't
I was certainly taught that we're supposed to push away and resist the evil thing, you know?
it?
Resist the devil and he will flee from you, right out of scripture.
You said something earlier, Dave, that I thought was very pertinent, and it's the question of if you're attacked by two wolves, which one you fight, or which one you resist, the one that you feed. That is so such great wisdom in that saying, and that's what this whole thing is about to me. You don't feed that. If you don't feed that, it loses its power to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when his novice master said, "So you're going to entertain lustful or hateful thoughts?" Question mark. Sounds to me that he was very much in the teacher mode, and challenging him to make a choice, but there's no choice necessary to be made, really, in my estimation. You let that go, it loses its power.
But
I
the
like where he's,
assumption, I'm sorry, go ahead, Scotty.
I like where at the beginning of the second paragraph he says, "Listen honestly to yourself. Listen to whatever thought, feeling arises. Listen long enough to ask, why am I thinking this? What is this saying about me? That I need to entertain this negative, accusatory, or lustful thought." I think that's an amazing suggestion. I never thought of really asking myself, what is this saying about me? I just usually petition God for help in making it go away. And then I remember some scripture that countered whatever was making me feel uncomfortable about the thought. Speaking about negative thoughts, of course, we have more than just negative thoughts that come and interrupt our meditation time. But I like what he's suggesting we do and the opportunities it gives us to really find out, why are we going through this? Why is this a distraction at all?
Mm-hmm.
And
Hey,
yet,
let me ask you, I got a question here. I mean, so his guidance is to yield to the resistance or the feeling or thought that's arising. But then he's encouraging us to listen long enough to ask those questions. But isn't that taking you out of the moment again? And so
Yeah.
you're starting to travel into new thoughts. And can't that get you more deeply mired into your thought life again and not being able to just kind of try to look at it non-judgmentally and be able to put it in a cloud and let it go.
I think
Well-
that's what he's trying to say, but I even like not judging it, but going, oh, well, maybe that thought suggests this about me, but that is a thought, and then like the river and the leaves and just but
Yeah.
I've gotten caught in that before with myself. I know, like, why was I thinking that? And then, oh my gosh, and then I feel guilty and oh my goodness, I shouldn't have thought that. And then I get stuck in that. And then I realize, oh yeah, I'm kidding. But then I just try to get back onto the flow.
The ability to ask the intelligent questions, I think, is what's really coming through for me. They seem very simple, but they're very powerful when you look at it, what he's suggesting you do. It can be a very quick process. Why is this here? What is it that it's wanting to interrupt me about? Is it important enough that I take my attention and leave the rest of my thoughts behind? Or no, you'll realize most of the time, no, it can wait, or I can take care of it later, or whatever. And the minute you realize that, for me, it drifts off, and I can go back to what I was doing.
To riff on what Judy's question was there, I am reminded of, I think it was Eckhart Tolle that talks about this in The Power of Now. He said, when you catch yourself in your thinking pattern or whatever, that's a moment of presence, right?
Yeah.
Like you can notice your thoughts and be present to the thoughts.
Right.
And then when you start to ask these questions that Scott is highlighting here, it can actually spark a little curiosity that's helpful and brings us again back into the present moment, rather than what Sarah was talking about, where you start to judge you
Right.
make a judgment and then you start judging your judging. And then feeling bad about having this thought in the first place, whereas it's actually a moment of the idea is that we can't stop our thoughts, period, and they're just going to come, and we need to just be present to the thoughts as they arrive, and that's the vehicle or the gateway back to presence, essentially.
Yeah, you guys are coming up with some good stuff here. Good stuff. Ellen?
Yeah, but isn't it similar to what you had? I learned is when I'm triggered by something, and it doesn't have anything to do with that something in my past triggered. What is it that I'm angry at her for doing that or saying that? Then you're thinking, why am I angry with this? Why is it triggering me? So it's something in my past. Okay. And then the second one, to be honest, sometimes if I am accusatory or less of a, sometimes it's, I don't know how to say it, like, it's not that it's fun, but it's energizing, or, when I'm accusing, that self-righteousness, it feels good to be self-righteous.
Yeah.
So that, right? Like, no, she shouldn't have done. She was wrong. I was right. It was page 44. You know what I mean?
You need to let that thought go, Ellen. Just let it go.
I know.
Well, it does anger and self-righteousness. It gives you momentary power feelings,
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Yes, I agree. I recognize that, but it's that for that moment.
Yeah.
It felt good at that moment. And then, of course, later on, you say, oh, yeah, I know it's judgmental, not self-righteous at that moment. Yeah.
Yes, Ellen, you were right and I was wrong, and I'm happy to give you a dopamine hit over that. So you go, girl.
One for Ellen.
Yay.
Okay, so here's what's going on. First of all, let's the first part of this that's really important for us to understand is the underlying assumption is that we need to resist something to purge it out of our system. Okay, that's what we typically do. In our day-to-day operations, we have to resist it, and we've got scriptural backing to resist the devil and he will flee and all that. But from a contemplative standpoint, we're going to do that by not doing it. Basically, it's way woo way again, do not do, right? That the idea of effortless effort. We're going to resist by not resisting. It's not yielding to it in the sense of letting it take us over or letting it continue to pose as actual reality, right? The thought is not reality. The feeling is not reality. It's just a thought. It's just a feeling. It's just neurochemistry. But we're also not going to try to push it out of our system.
Right.
What Rohr always comes back to is that everything is a teaching opportunity. Everything is a learning opportunity for us if we will allow it. And that's one of the things, one of the mantras around here that I've been hitting you guys with over and over is pay attention to what offends you, right? I mean, our goal is to become unoffendable, but pay attention to what offends you because that is shedding light on what's going on underneath the hood. It's the warning light on the dashboard that's letting you know there's something wrong under the hood and you need to pay some attention to it. So that's giving you some insight into your own unresolved, unfinished business. And the same thing is going on here with these thoughts that reoccur. Now, let's expand the idea of contemplative practice beyond just a centering prayer or meditational sit. Because kind of, Judy, your question was kind of coming in, it sounded like coming in the context of an actual meditational sit or a centering prayer sit, where we're not supposed to take things apart and start analyzing them or asking questions because that takes us further out, right, of that choiceless awareness that we're trying to achieve. But the contemplative practice is also encompassing, all of our waking moments, whether we're in a meditational sit or whether we're just going through daily activities. We want as much as possible to maintain that kind of presence, that you're choicelessly present. We're not focusing on things that are not right in the moment with us. If we notice a distracting thought, and now this is getting kind of back to what Ellen was talking about, if we're noticing a distracting thought, first of all, that's persistent or has a certain theme to it, right? Or carries an emotional content along with it, then that would be the point for us to spend some time and say, why am I continuing to think about this? What is this revealing about myself? That's not necessarily in your prayer time. That's not in your quiet time necessarily. That can be at another time during the day. The interesting thing about centering prayer is that most of the value of the things that it brings up, that bubble up out of the subconscious, don't happen during the meditational sit, not during the prayer time. It happens the rest of the day. And I read that, and then darn if I didn't experience exactly that. It wasn't during the prayer time that anything happened. And I was used to praying for something. I was used to praying for revelation, for God to reveal something for me. And I was getting nothing during my quiet time. But then after a while, during the day, these things would bubble up. Suddenly there'd be this memory that I'd forgotten, and that bright line between that and current thought and behavior patterns. It's like, oh yeah. And that kind of revelation and insight starts to come through the day. But to start to pay attention to the thoughts that continue to distract you and then seeing what they can reveal, what can you learn about them is what he's talking about. The wisdom, what does he say in that third paragraph or the second? You don't have to let you hate yourself or condemn yourself for a thought or feeling, but you do have to let it yield its wisdom. And that's, I think, that interior process that is going to be more cognitive, right? And so you wouldn't want to be doing that during your prayer time, but you'll have plenty of time afterwards. So think of contemplative practice as more inclusive. It's really going to encompass our entire waking life, both whether we are meditating or centering or whether we're just trying to live mindfully. And maybe that'll help broaden it. That makes sense?
That does help, I think. I guess where I go with that is that, there have been times when I've been sitting, I might be dwelling on a mantra that I've been doing or practicing over the last 30 days. And I've been saying to myself, I love you. I am listening. And I start from there and then just kind of try to, repeat it and just see what starts bubbling up. And I try to welcome it, whatever comes up. and almost like in my mind, I tag it and note curiously, okay, I'm not sure what that's about, but I'll wait for, kind of more wisdom about it. And you're right, Dave. I think there's things that when I go away and live my day out, it's amazing what things come at me. When then I start to connect the dots, between experiences, or something emerges out of a meeting, a phrase that somebody used, or an idea that they put out there, and it's like, oh wow, one was for me. And it does yield wisdom. I learn more about myself.
Absolutely. How many of you have gone to bed thinking about an issue, a problem, or something that you need to solve? And when you wake up in the morning, it's like, there's that spark, there's the idea. You had to get away from it for a while. You had to stop thinking about it and let your interior self process it. And then it just kind of presents. That happens a lot to me. And so it's again, it's kind of like the parable of the growing seed, where the farmer does all the work, creates the environment, then goes to bed, and he wakes up and there's the plant starting to grow. It happens while he's sleeping. It's like that with us. And so as we let our mind go fallow, both in the time of contemplative prayer, but also in mindfulness during the day, that's when stuff starts to happen. I really think that spending time in contemplation is thinning out the barrier between the unconscious and the conscious, making it permeable so that things do bubble up. I always have the image of those mud pots in Yellowstone, and it pops up. Kind of comes up that way out of your subconscious. And then once it's in your conscious, now you can start to process it, and you can actively, intentionally, with awareness, start to apply the opposite action that you may need to apply in order to change. Now we're practicing CBT, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy. We're actively changing our thought and behavior patterns. But until we know what they are, until we're aware of them, and most importantly, aware of them in real time, aware of them in the present moment, then we don't have a choice to make. We don't have the capacity to make a choice. We're just going to run on the programming, stimulus response. But once we open up a space between the stimulus and response with our awareness, now we have the place from which we can take a breath and make a different choice, and then start really rewiring. And that's what contemplation does for us. It opens up the space between stimulus and response. It gives us that awareness, allows our awareness to catch up to us in real time, so that we can really see what love requires in a situation, and not just what the rules tell us to do or what the unconscious programming tells us to do.
Like William, I read Eckhart Tolle's book, and like that came to mind when I was reading this just now, and it was many, many years ago, but I found it it took me years. I find this not to be very easy, because it was a major paradigm shift in my brain, because I thought all those thoughts were uncontrollable. So once I started learning and practicing this, it was really challenging. It took me years and years. Fortunately, like I said, I got to work through it through reading Eckhart's book. But what I find now is, after I practice it for a lot, I just get back into living normal, and all of a sudden something will happen. And fortunately, like Rose has got some experience, my wife Rose, and then she'll bring up like, like, where are you going with this? And then that helps me to pull back and say, oh yeah, I'm having this anxiousness, and that's causing these thoughts, and then I'm behaving based on the anxiousness. Anyways, I didn't mean to confuse anybody. I struggle with this really deep, where and I still do, or many times I have to tell myself, stop the thoughts, because it's not thinking, they're just these random things come through that my brain and my body got so used to solving or trying to solve all these things, whether they were good or bad, they needed to be solved. And so I like, yeah, I guess I'm saying that as an encouragement for anybody that really attempts to try to do this. I don't know how good anybody can really get at this, but it's good practice to know.
It really
You
is.
can get quite good at it, Tony, but your struggle is everybody's struggle. And the truth of the matter is, you know, when you talked about your thoughts being uncontrollable, the more you try to control your thoughts, the more that they're uncontrollable. Literally, it is your focus on them that is making them more and more controllable because you're giving them more and more energy. And let's face it, what William said earlier, we don't have control over our thoughts. We don't have control of when they're going to pop into our head. We don't have control over our emotions. They're going to pop up when they pop up, you know, and we're going to get triggered when we get triggered, and we have no control over that. The good news here is anything that you don't have control of is not a sin. All right? Take that one to the bank. If you can't control it, then you're not responsible for it. And it's not a sin. So this judging that Sarah was talking about, which is so common, we do that to ourselves, right? We judge ourselves for not being able to do this and that. But literally, we don't have any control over that. It's like Martin Luther said, I can't help it if a bird flies over my head, but I can keep it from building a nest in my hair. All right? Same idea here. What are we going to do with that thought? Are we going to let it continue to spin and spin and keep playing the tapes? Or are we going to let it play through? Sarah brought up the image of the river, you know, that you're sitting by the bank of the river and the river's flowing by and bringing all these little bits and pieces and logs and leaves or whatever. You're watching it go by. But if you just let it go by and don't fixate on it, that's the natural progression of things. So if we can just be aware of the thoughts, but not think about them, not fixate on them, let them pass by. Maybe we make some sort of mental note, the watcher does, so that afterwards we can spend some time with them. Why do I keep thinking that particular thought? Or do these thoughts have a pattern to them that are pointing to something that I need to take a look at? You know, a dream journal can be real important for this kind of work as well. Because if you wake up out of your dream and you remember it, you're only going to remember it for 5 or 10 minutes maybe, and then it's gone. But if you can write it down, it can be really insightful because your dreams are putting into metaphorical or figurative settings the things that you're processing during the day, the things that are stressing you, things that are the subject of your fears and your concerns. And then the dream will put it into some sort of metaphorical context. To be able to see where those are again pointing you back toward what is really affecting you, just like your offenses will, and just like recurring thoughts will. So to use that as a way to get back down to the unconscious material, because we can't deal with it directly. It's unconscious by definition. But we can come at it sideways and we can let it bubble up and we can do different things. And then we can actually let it dissipate. And we let it dissipate by focusing elsewhere, coming back to the present moment, focus on what we're doing. That is how we displace the things that are just distracting and are not serving any positive purpose in our life. Not by trying to wish them into the cornfield. We can't do that. That doesn't work.
I think Rohr absolutely nails it in this next paragraph. When you read the first line, it says, you don't have to hate yourself or condemn yourself for a thought or feeling, but you do have to let it yield to its wisdom. The line that got me was, which is I believe is very, very true, says, then you will see it is the wounded or needy part of you that wants these unhealthy thoughts. And the part that said the wounded or needy part of you. And that's the part that we say, well, we try to not to think about it, but that's the wounded or needy part that allows us to ruminate on that dark thought or action or occurrence, in my purview, humbly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dave, I'm thinking of like the 7 deadly sins, like anger and lust and, you know, jealousy and those types of things.
There's
And
William.
say again? I'm sorry.
Keep going there, William.
I'm sorry. I got
Pay
distracted.
no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Right.
He's having a passing thought.
And you said we can't be judged, or we can't be, it's not a sin because it's, how did you say it? If we can't control it, it's not a sin.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, if it's not under our control, then we're not responsible.
Then we're
It's
not.
it's not a sin if we didn't choose it. You know, if we didn't choose something, then it's not a sin. If we can't control it, it's not a sin.
But I mean, like lust, or,
Yeah.
you know, coveting my neighbor's wife, or, you know, recognizing, seeing somebody's wife and finding that person physically attractive. I mean, I know there's a line in the book that says, like, if the thought exists in your head, like you've already
Already
created,
said.
yeah, right?
Yeah, I think
That scripture verse.
yeah, I
Yes,
know
there
what
is, but you know, the point, William, is you get the first thought for free.
The rumination.
What are you going to do with the second thought? Because now that you're aware of it, it's back under your control. You know, you can't help it if the bird flies over your head. Are you going to let it build a nest? Are you going to continue to play those tapes? Are you going to take it down the road? Are you going to take it to the point where you're actually going to act on it? That's the part that's what Jesus is actually talking about. You know, the idea was, if you haven't committed adultery, then you're okay. You're righteous by the law. But he's saying, hey, if you're just entertaining these thoughts, you've already, you know, taken steps toward that, and you've already started to erode the relationship that you have with your wife. And so that's the key here. You know, what's our interior life like? But hey, if we just see something that's attractive, see someone that's attractive, yeah, that's natural. You're going to get that first thought for free. But what are you going to do with it?
but my brain was also trained to, you know, you have a thought where it's angry at somebody or accusing of somebody unhealthy, and then, I mean, this is how my brain was trained. Oh, God, forgive me for having that thought, right? There's that judgment and condemnation of myself,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is the acceptable form with people I talk to or the readings I read, and that's the response of having that unhealthy thought.
You know, there's nothing wrong with a short prayer like that, Ellen, as long as it is an expression of your desire to not follow that path. It's just the acknowledgement and awareness that there's still that part of you, you know, that is still yet unresolved, that you can still be triggered in that particular way. It shouldn't create a huge amount of guilt. And if it does, then it's something that you kind of need to address, because like I said, that's involuntary. We don't have control over that. And in fact, sometimes you think you've evolved past it, and then, you know, something triggers you and there you are, spiked again. And it's just like, whoa, where did that come from? It's not my fault. It's just human nature. So we don't need to feel guilty about it, and we don't really need to be forgiven for it. But to say something like that is possibly just your way of acknowledging it, bringing you back into connection with God's spirit and presence and so on and so forth. So it depends on how you're using it. We shouldn't be carrying around a lot of guilt for this. But again, if our awareness is catching up to us through our contemplative practice, we're going to be more and more aware of when we're triggered. And we're going to be more and more aware when thoughts have distracted us and pulled us away from the task at hand and from the moment. And then we can just acknowledge them, realize that they're there, and then come back. The welcoming practice is a way of owning our emotions, the ones that spike up, those negative ones. And instead of trying to repress them, instead of trying to, you know, feel in some way guilty for them, it's just like, oh no, this is part of who I am right now. I'm going to welcome it. I'm going to sit in it. I'm going to own it, but I'm not going to act on it. And those little prayers that are the third step of the welcoming practice are to bring you back into confluence with what's right in front of you. And so it's, you know, it's really a lessening of the angst that we carry around. I mean, the way that his novice master put it, yeah, so you're going to entertain hateful and lustful thoughts. I mean, that's all putting all the weight of the law back on you and all that garbage. It's just like, no, what we want to do is release it. Jesus said, my burden is light, my yoke is easy. It's difficult to get to the place where it's light and easy. But when we get there, yeah, that's the way it feels. There's just so much less that we have to feel angsty about.
For me, the Enneagram and its coverage of both our, especially of our shadow side that there is in each of us, that helped me so much to be able to release, to acknowledge. I was part of the 8, 9, and 1 group, which is, the passion, the bad thing is anger. But it took different forms in each of us. And for me being a 1, I had this simmering resentment thing for most of my life going on. And I had to learn how to deal with that in a healthier way. But it kind of unlocked for me the shame that I felt, about my anger, and the judgment that I put on it. And it really, it softened it for me that each, and from my understanding of other people, that, we're all this admixture of, wonderful qualities, and yet we've got these shadow sides that we're all trying to deal with. And those are the things that are helping us to accept ourselves as we are. So I just offer that up. I think that has helped me on my journey, to accept myself, and when I feel the resistance or the anger coming up or the fear, I can say, okay, I'm not sure I quite understand how or why, but I'm just gonna let it sink in a little bit and come back to it,
What's beautiful about that, Judy, is that it really is a picture of true humility. Because what humility is seeing yourself as you actually are, not trying to pump yourself up, but also not trying to beat yourself down.
Yeah.
And to put yourself into that lower category, but just to see, yes, the light side, the shadow side, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of these are parts of myself. There's a reason that they are there. Some things need to be continued to be diffused. We want to be the best version of ourselves, but it's there for a reason. There's a reason it's there. And most of the difficulties that we have and the fears that we have were implanted in us as children when we didn't have a choice in the matter. We're just trying to survive. We're trying to breathe. We're trying to create enough order out of chaotic situations often, that we feel like we can, have some sense of control and happiness. And then those persist as unconscious core beliefs and those programs that Keating talks about. That's not our fault. Now, what we do with them, we're still responsible for. So these people who break the law or hurt other people, we have to put them in prison because they have to be accountable to the law. But we can also at the same time understand how they got there. We can be saying spiritually with Jesus, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing, because literally they don't, even as you, close the cell door and lock it. So both can happen at the same time. But we need to be able to do the same for ourselves. We need to be able to say, God, forgive me, I didn't know what I'm doing. I just don't know what I'm doing sometimes. I mean, when you are not aware in the moment, when your emotion is completely taken over and you're just inside that bubble as if it's real, then you're completely justified in that space. Everything is self-consistent and it makes sense, even as you're hurting people all left and right. We don't know what we're doing. We're still responsible for what we do, but we don't know what we're doing. What we want to do is become aware so that we can actually make choices that really do have everyone's best interest at heart as well as our own. But we're not going to get there by continuing to beat ourselves down either. And so starting to realize that, some things are voluntary and some things are involuntary. The ones that are voluntary, let's become aware enough so we can do something about them. But hey, these thoughts are going to keep coming. I don't care how advanced you get, but you get better and better at just letting the river flow.
Yeah.
He says here that the real learning curve happens when you can admit that you're having the thought or feeling and see that it's empty, passing, and part of your own fantasy world that has no final reality except as a lesson. And I think we need to pay attention to that.
Yep,
That
that's
it's a
exactly the
lesson.
point.
Yep.
hmm
He said it very well.
So in that, in that second to the last, or I guess the second paragraph, there's only 3 of them. And we've read this several times now, but you don't have to hate yourself or condemn yourself for a thought or feeling because you don't have control over them, right? They're going to come unbidden to you. But you do need to let it yield its wisdom. And so learn from it. This is the same idea that we talk about when we say you don't try to resolve a paradox, right? Don't allow yourself to try to flop down one side or the other and pick a side, because then the paradox has lost its power to reveal its wisdom. It's the same thing here. What you're clinging to and what you're actively opposing, if you can refrain from doing that and just pass through the middle, it can reveal its wisdom. We can find that I suppose it's a kind of resolution on the other side, but it doesn't ever really resolve. The tension and staying in that place of tension in the middle is what allows us to actually grow. And so just allowing it to keep passing through. He says, then you will see it as the wounded or needing part as of yourself that wants the unhealthy thoughts, that needs, I suppose, those thoughts. The whole you, the true self, does not need them, won't identify with them. And the more that you move forward in contemplative practice, the more that your true self, that whole self that he talks about, is going to become a real part of you, instead of just assuming that the egoic, the small self, is the totality of who you are. You're going to realize that there is more to you than that. If you can allow your thoughts and feelings to pass through you, neither clinging to them nor opposing them, without ever expecting perfect success, that's a real important line. As soon as you start expecting perfect success, now you're off to the races again, right? Now you're giving energy to certain things that shouldn't be getting that energy. You have an agenda that you're bringing to either your prayer sessions or just to your waking life. Remember, it's only 51%. That's all we need. Just more often than not, we're able to do this. We're able to bring our awareness into the present moment and choose accordingly. He says, if you can do that, I promise you will come to a deeper, wider, and wiser place. Believe it or not, even your inability to fully succeed is in itself another wonderful lesson. Do you believe that last line? That your inability to succeed is another wonderful lesson?
Yeah.
If you
Yeah, I
can,
do.
if you
As long
can
as the
put your,
awareness is there, yes.
Yeah.
if you can put yourself in a state where you realize that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, everything becomes teachable moment. The hard stuff, the kids throwing the rocks at Tony, the challenges that we have in life, everything can be a teachable moment. But we've got to adjust our minds accordingly.
So what is your inability to succeed teaching you?
That's the question. It's the question we all have.
I
Humility.
know it's the question I'm asking.
Humility.
Yes, Judy, it's humility. Of course it is. If we somehow think that we are supposed to fully succeed at all of this, if we somehow think that's what God either desires or commands of us, is to be fully successful in all of this, to be good all the time, quote unquote, whatever we think good is, then we are exhibiting pride, basically, the opposite of humility. We can't do that as humans. It's impossible. And so to finally accept your own inability to fully succeed is just the acquiring of the humility that allows you to see yourself as you are, human. We're not always going to be able to do this, but we will get better and better at it. And as we get better at it, the anxiety lessens, the trust increases and the angst and the anxiety decreases. The two work inversely proportional to one another. How much do you trust? Measure how stressed you are. I mean, about anything. That's how much you trust. If your stress is up, you're not trusting. If the stress is down, the things that we trust fully are the things we don't think about anymore. We don't plan for them. We don't worry about them. We don't call them up to make sure they're going to be on time. We just trust. And so our inability to fully succeed is this marker of our ability to accept ourselves as we really are and to trust that we're loved anyway, even if we're not performing to our own specifications, whatever we think those are in our noggins.
I think it's a little bit of what Judy said too about, your inability to succeed. Also, don't go into this shamification of yourself desperately. I've seen people do that where they just say, oh, that's it. I'm never doing this again. I'm done with this. And, they just like knock themselves down. And then it like ruins it for their children are watching this, oh, my mom or my dad is never going to try this again. Oh, I guess that's what you do. So there's just all this negative stuff that comes from that shame spiral that you can get into. So that the awareness of what you were talking about, Judy, with just some of the Enneagram stuff, I mean, it's just, that's what it's all about, really, I think.
There was a guy that I knew from churches past, and his line that he said over and over again is, I am the worst sinner I know. I'm the worst sinner I know. After a while, you started to realize that he was taking pride in being the worst sinner that he knew. I mean, he was the best at something. He was the best sinner that he knew. And it's interesting how we will do that to ourselves. One thing in the program, when you started hearing a lot of the shares and the war stories in AA or Al-Anon or whatever, it's almost like, can you top this? I'm going to tell this horrible story about my life, and then someone has to have a worse horror story. And it's almost like we're starting to take this perverse pride in at least being the best of something, even if it's negative. We've got to just watch yourself, and start to become aware of and identify when you're falling into some of these places. And we just want to get to that place of humility where we're just seeing what really is. Not colored in any way, positively or negatively. And
that it's okay.
And that it's okay. Exactly.
There's actually,
I've heard people say, I've heard people say in a meeting, being human is not a character defect.
That's a good line. I like that.
There's laugh at yourself.
So for what you were referring to, Dave, it's called humble
Ellen,
brag.
start over again. I missed
Yeah. No, there's a term actually for what you were referring to about you want to top each other. I'm the worst sinner. It's called humble brag.
What's it called?
Wait, it's called what?
Humble brag.
Humble brag.
So like the example saying, there was an example saying, oh, see, I volunteered for this, making houses. Oh my gosh, I'm so sweaty. I'm so tired. But now I can rest. I still and see how sweaty I am. So it's a humble. Nobody was asking you, but you have to share. Well, why am I so sweaty? Oh, because I built houses. Something like that.
Reminds me of that scene in Jaws where they're in the boat and they're comparing their scars, which one's bigger.
Yep. It's a good one, Kathy.
I was having a thought about something Judy said earlier when you were talking about the Enneagram, and I find it liberating on some level to remember that my Enneagram strategy is something I came up with when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, basically. And if I am relying on that strategy as a 50-year-old, right? It's like me taking the wisdom of my 5-year-old self to tell me how to act.
Help you.
And kind of using that as permission to be gentle with my flaws.
Yeah.
Because my 5-year-old immature self is the one that, decided to be a perfectionist or a peacemaker or whatever it might be.
That's a great point, William. Perfect.
Mhm.
Perfect way to
Yeah.
put it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I like that, William.
And that's literally what we're dealing with, you know, and when we talk about inner child work or whatever, I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about recognizing where all this was formed, where it's coming from, what's deep down inside of us, you know. Our egoic minds would like to imagine that we are, you know, light years away from all of that, but we're not, you know. That's just a little elusive bubble that we've got going on. I mean, what's really driving the bus is that 5-year-old child that William's talking about, where all this stuff was formed and still persists into our 5th decade, right? And so this is the work, and this is the way we're doing it. You can do it on the psychologist's couch if you want to, but contemplative practice can take you to the same place.
Yeah, it
You know,
does.
it may take a little longer. It's undirected to the extent that you're not, you know, working with a spiritual director. But it's the same process. It's the same process. And this is Jesus' way. This is what Jesus' way is. And he says it's the only way back to the Father, because it's the only way back to the presence in the moment that allows us to interface with God's spirit and presence, which is only accessible right here and right now. That's it. That's the only place we're going to connect with God at this kind of level. So the only way we're going to have the quality of life that Jesus is talking about is if we do this work, if we follow this way, if we're willing to sell everything, if we're willing to pick up our cross daily and deny ourselves. All that metaphoric language that he uses is hammering the same point. And it's what we're talking about here. And contemplative practice is one way to do it. You know, you might be able, I mean, to me, it's the purest way. And all the world's traditions and religions have, you know, contemplative and mystical traditions, because this is the only one way back to the Father. And so this is what we're doing here. And Jesus is showing us that way.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up, Dave, because I was just going to ask. It's that practicing this is going to help me get centered back into God's love for myself and for others and for him. So it's a rebirthing of my thoughts. And that's, you kind of explained it, but it's really, it gives me a new outlook. And I know recently, from just all the weeks I've been going to church and keep hearing about, if you're making the decision on love, you're probably going in the right direction. But I find when I get frustrated with some of my neighbors and the HOA thing here, that it's like if I go into like, okay, how do I love them through this? It really changes my mindset. And I'm not angry and bitter, and I'm understanding and forgiving. Anyways,
That's
I don't
perfect,
think
Tony.
you have to love people in the HOA though. That's a free pass.
It's a thankless job, Tony, so I hear your pain.
Me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I just resigned from my like 10 years of being the HOA president. So
Oh, God, how did you
yeah,
survive?
yeah, this June's 30th, my last day, but it is, I can deal with the thanklessness. It's just how angry and bitter people get at other things. And it doesn't become a whole, it's just becomes, it appears to me, it becomes themselves.
Mhm.
You know, and it seems like, so, you know, the same, almost the same person. Like, I'll give you an example. I had a neighbor moved in, but he's a renter and his lawn wasn't as green as everybody thought it should be. And so, you know, I approached him and say, hey, you know, I heard some things, and he says, you're not gonna believe this. He says, but my sprinkler system broke down. It fell in the mud. It's not working. And I'm like, I hate to see it this way too. And I'm like, hey, how about if I come over and help you next week? And he's like, yeah, great idea. And it's like, if we could just do that more as people, then throw that dart at this guy's yellow lawn. By the way, I drove by and looked at the lawn. I'm like, okay, there's 3 pieces of dead grass on there. I mean, this is like ridiculous that
Yeah,
we're gonna hate each other so much over such a
right.
minute thing. But it irritates, on the other side, it irritates people because they need to read Richard Rohr's book here.
So if you find yourself getting totally bent because there's 3 patches of dead grass on someone's lawn, then you can ask yourself, why am I so offended? Why am I having these thoughts? What is it that's driving me? And you start drilling down. And the question you always ask yourself is the same one. What am I afraid of? That's going to lead you like a laser guided missile to the source of all of this stuff, because it's all fear driven. Are you worried that it's going to drive down your property values? Are you worried about, what is it? And then that goes to your security issues, and that goes right back to that 5-year-old. It's amazing how this works, and it's predictable, and we're all fighting the same thing. That's why someone 2,000 years ago or 20 years ago can write something that still resonates and is absolutely true for us, because people are people. And so this is the path. It's the only path, the only way. And contemplation is the way for us to gain that kind of awareness so that we can start to live in the connection and presence of kingdom. So that's what we're doing here. All right, we better call it a night. You know what I loved about this session? This session was great. I didn't have to go back and dissect. You guys were doing all the dissecting here. This is perfect. Perfect. You guys are getting better and better at this. Pretty much I'll be able to just phone it all in. You guys will do it on your own.
Don't you dare.
Okay, Scotty, over to you.
Father God, thank you for this night. The joy that fills our hearts. The learning that takes place, and the encouraging and giving of hope, and all the side effects of sharing and studying and having Dave to help us decipher the different things that we could consider and sometimes we don't consider without his encouragement, and take a look at and see a wider picture. And ultimately we see you, the widest picture that we could hope for. So thank you for that revelation. Thank you for this time together. Thank you for all the lessons that we have learned and we're still going to be learning. We love you, Lord. It's in your precious name, Lord Jesus, that we pray and give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
Amen.
And
Thank you, everyone.
Scotty.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Great
Thanks,
conversation.
everybody. Yeah.
Right.
Love you
See you
guys.
Sunday.
Good night.
Sunday.
Love you.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night, Jordana. I hope to see you Sunday.